Hello and welcome to the Chorus in the Chaos podcast. My name is Jack, and I'm joined, as always, by Blake, but not with Grayson. Grayson is tending to some family things tonight, getting some well-deserved and well-needed rest.
Yeah.
There's a chance he may pop up sometime this evening, but both of Blake and I kind of expect him to take the night off.
Yeah. What we need you to do, though, is if he does pop in like a 90s surprise cameo, everybody needs to cheer and clap and all of that. So
Yes, that would be good.
Yeah, right. Like Grayson's like the fun-loving neighbor that's like a cast favorite that pops in, and everybody cheers and whoops,
Every step you take.
Right, exactly.
Have that played in the background.
Grayson really is our Uncle Jesse, I guess.
He is kind of Uncle Jesse. Yeah. It's fun-loving Uncle Jesse.
Yeah.
Well, tonight we're going to be, I think it's our last kind of introductory,
like preparatory
episode before we actually get into the Ten Commandments. And man, if you're still listening, we are so long-winded sometimes. I don't know.
I hope it's been beneficial, though. I mean, it's been.
I hope so too. Yeah.
Yeah. We talk about this offline. That these conversations are beneficial to us, even if they never made it out to anyone else. We enjoy, talking about these things and studying these things and debating these things. So, yeah. We hope it's been beneficial. Yeah, for you folks, and thanks for sticking with us. And we're kind of like, we're kind of standing on the high dive. When you're a kid and you're just teetering at the edge, just waiting to jump in. And it's taken us a little while to build it up, but we're getting ready to take the plunge.
We're almost there. We're almost there.
Just give me a moment. I'm almost ready.
Yeah. I'm going, Mom. Just wait.
Jump. You're holding up the line.
The line is getting long.
Yeah, right. I got a line of podcasts I'm trying to listen to here. You guys need to get to the point. Yeah.
Well, we are almost to the point. This will be the final one. And what this episode is, I actually think it'll be a really good episode. This is one I've been looking forward to when we put the outline of episodes, kind of sketch the season together. This is one I thought, I think this will be a really good episode because I found it incredibly helpful to think through the Ten Commandments this way. What we'll be doing is basically it's going to be a semi-audio book tonight of, look at that. Look at that. If you can't see right now, both of us are holding up the book.
We didn't even plan that. We didn't even plan it. We just held them up at the same time. Right. And you've even got little note markers in yours like I do.
Yeah, look at that right there.
Yeah.
But we're holding up the Ten Commandments book by Thomas Watson. And the reason...
Is yours the Banner of Truth one?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's one I have too.
It's the way to go.
Nice.
Yeah. Great book. The book is so good, in fact, that, it has been a guide for us in a lot of, I think it'll be a ongoing guide, a reference point for us as we go through the season. But there's a section in this book near the beginning where Watson gives 8 rules for reading the Ten Commandments, and they're exceptional and really helpful. And I think, and I would not be surprised if you listener have not thought about them. When you read the Ten Commandments, you're not thinking about them in the full scope by which you should. And I didn't. When I first kind of read through this, I realized, I've never really, when I've read and studied the Ten Commandments, I've never thought about them from this aspect. And I found it incredibly helpful. So we're going to do an episode. I don't know what this will be called by the time it gets out, but tentatively on my outline, it's Watson's 8 rules for reading the Ten Commandments. And that is what we're going to walk through tonight.
We can just before we do that thing, the 8 rules for reading the Ten Commandments, Thomas Watson, Blake and Jack,
Blake and Jack. Yes.
right.
That will be us tonight. Right. That will be us tonight. A couple of housekeeping items, just quickly. You guys know the drill if you follow and listen to us. Reviews, likes, shares, comments on YouTube, all those things really do help. I actually was looking at some statistics the other day. I forgot to share this with you, Blake. And on our Spotify account, I think it's the same on Apple. Apple just doesn't share this, but on our Spotify account, like a third of our listeners are finding the podcast just because it's been recommended by Spotify, which is pretty cool.
Oh, wow.
But that happens when you guys leave reviews. So even if you've listened to us a couple times, enjoy it, please go leave a 5-star review because it really does make a difference. That's how people find us. One of the key ways people find us. Anything else, Blake, before we jump into this?
No, I don't think so. Apart from if you want to talk about the Reformation Heritage book.
Yeah, we should do that. So, we've mentioned this book, The Ten Commandments. I'm quite sure it is on Reformation Heritage site. You probably heard the little ad at the introduction, but we're we're excited to be partnered with them this season. It's a big deal for us. It's super encouraging for us, and we hope it's a good thing for you, because it's a company / publisher / ministry that we really believe in. I mean, my books are on my bookshelves are on either side of the camera here, so you can't see them, but there are a lot of books that you could that I've got from them and would be available on their website. Right. So
they have a lot of great stuff and a reasonable prices. And one of the cool things is, so with them being with us this season, and which you probably heard in the ad, if you use the discount code CHORUS, you can get, I think, 10% off on your purchase?
An extra 10% off.
Yeah, which
the
is
whole
really
purchase.
Cool. So you can pick this book up, The 10 Commandments by Thomas Watson, which, again, highly, highly recommend. It is also, there is also a free PDF of this book on monergism. So if you like reading off of a tablet or a computer and you don't mind that, feel free to grab that, and it's free. But if you want it to look real pretty on your bookshelf, you're going to want to hop over to the website and order
You're going to want to do that. You should do that. Yeah.
You're going to want to do that. Yeah. Exactly.
So, okay, well, let me give a little illustration here, kind of set the tone. I'm not going to do old Pastor Simeon. I thought about it, but my wisdom got the better of me. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
So the question, if you ask yourself, why do I need rules to read the 10 Commandments? Can I just open the Bible and read it? Well, you can, right? But I want you to consider the 1984 classic, The Karate Kid. Blake, have you seen The Karate Kid?
I have seen it.
Yeah.
I hate that movie.
It's the hero's the wrong hero. Like the kid, he deserves
right.
He gets beat up. He's like, well, you really deserve to get
right.
Anyway,
like the character that deserves to be beat up in that movie is the hero.
The hero. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Daniel LaRusso.
I'm sorry in the movie, if you really love that movie. I don't.
You can
I didn't grow up
on
watching
YouTube.
It, so yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it has one of those nostalgia.
So it doesn't have the nostalgia factor for me.
It does for some people, and they're offended. That's okay. You can tell us how we're wrong in the comments on YouTube. Yeah. And it makes everyone happy. But Daniel LaRusso,
5-star review, and then complain in the comments.
Yes, say anything you want after the 5-star review.
I'm gonna try to work on the 6th interruption of. There it is. I just did it. Interrupted Jack for the 6th time already.
I'm about to play the old Pastor Simeon music.
Oh no! All right, I'm done. Go ahead, Jack.
But Daniel LaRusso, the Karate Kid, is trained by Mr. Miyagi to compete in a karate tournament. But instead of teaching him flashy, aggressive moves, he doesn't just jump into the tournament. Mr. Miyagi insists that Daniel first learn some basic, seemingly unrelated tasks like waxing the car, painting the fence, sanding the floor. And these tasks, which seem mundane to him, are actually designed to teach him foundational karate techniques, stances,
and
blocks,
free labor for Mr. Miyagi.
And free, which is very smart. But it's these rules and guidance. Right. It's these rules and guidance that Daniel LaRusso has to go through before he's ready to really enter the karate tournament. And I propose to you, listener, in a very poor illustration to get this podcast started, that Blake is Mr. Miyagi and you are the Karate Kid.
Right. Oh, no.
Yeah, anyway, but you get the point, right? Yeah. It really does help to have some guidance when you go into these things. Because as I mentioned earlier, and I think you'll see as we get into these rules that that there's some angles here and some ways of thinking, and some depth and some broad, expanded capacity by which we're intended to read and study the 10 Commandments, which just may not be apparent if you just open the book of Exodus and read it.
Yeah. These 8 rules are, again, they're principles that are pulled from elsewhere in Scripture, so they all have a scriptural root, and it really makes a beautiful scaffolding for being able to maneuver around the 10 Commandments and to examine them from different angles. And so really, really kind of wonderful stuff, and we're excited to share it with you. So with that being said, let's get to rule number 1. So how are we, when we're looking at the commandments, what's the first rule for approaching them? Rule number 1, the commands and prohibitions of the moral law reach the heart. Now, this is something that we have covered at length. In fact, we've talked about it the last couple of episodes that we've done. And it's the reality that the commandments require not just the outward action, but the inward affection must match the outward affection, or the inward affection and the outward action must be on the same page. There's the outward obedience aspect, but there's also the inward love for God, which makes it that which is pleasing. Deuteronomy 6:5, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart. And so we've talked about that extensively. The threats and the prohibitions of the moral law reach the heart. The law of God forbids not only the act of sin, but the desire and the inclination. Not only does it forbid adultery, for example, in Matthew chapter 5 that Jesus says, but it also forbids lust, which of course is the root of adultery. Not only does it forbid stealing, but it forbids coveting also. So you have that outward action, the heart desire that goes along with it, kind of Romans 7:7. One of the things that Watson, being a good Puritan, he just smathers his book with Latin. And I thought about it. I tried my pronunciation, and I just butcher it every time. So there's this really fancy Latin phrase that Watson uses, and it's very impressive, that essentially means man's law binds only the hands, but God's law binds the heart. So rule number 1, the commands and prohibitions of the moral law must reach the heart. Okay?
Yes.
Rule number 2, Jack.
Rule number 2, in the commandments, there is a synecdoche. A synecdoche. More is intended than is spoken, is what that word means. And I'll give you an example of a synecdoche, right? If you were to turn on the news and see the White House issued a statement, right? This example, what you would understand that to mean, well, the U.S. government or the administration is what is issuing the statement, not the actual White House. So the White House says it; it's like a piece of it. The White House is a piece of the government. But when you hear the thing, your intention is to understand, well, there's more that's being said. You're interpreting the thing. Like if someone were to say all hands on deck, if you're on a ship and someone says all hands on deck, that literally doesn't mean just the hands of the sailors, but the entire person, their attention. Like there is more that is being communicated by what is
explicitly said. Right.
Correct. So in a similar manner, when we read the 10 Commandments, we need to recognize that there is more that is being just said than what is literally written. We need to step back and look at everything. Watson says this. He says, where any duty is commanded, there is the contrary sin is forbidden. Okay. So for an example, the Lord says, keep the Sabbath holy, right? So therefore the inverse of that would also be true, right? When we're commanded to keep the Sabbath holy, we are forbidden. Therefore are forbidden to break the Sabbath. When we're commanded to live a calling, 6 days you shall labor, there we are forbidden to live idly or out of calling, is what he says. So where any sin is forbidden, the contrary duty is commanded. Make sense, Blake?
Yeah. Would you say that falls in that category of, there's a phrase for it. Basically, the positive and the negative aspects of the commands. So, like the 6th commandment, "Thou shalt not murder." That there's also then attached to that the duty to preserve life, right? Not just to not take life, but to preserve life as well. This would kind of fall into that category. That there's more spoken. There's more meaning behind what's taking place, more intended than just the bare minimum of the phrase.
Exactly. So it's helpful, right? When we read the 10 Commandments, for years I've read them and not thought about it from that angle, right? I just read, okay, well, and I think this was a thing that the Pharisees got themselves into, right? Because they looked at the letter of the law, no more, no less. That was it, and it kind of goes back to rule number 1 about the application of the heart. Like there's more that is being said than what's literally just written in a line, and a faithful student of the Bible needs to look at this and understand that. And I think your example probably of, thou shalt not murder is a great one, because really what that is it's you don't murder, because there is also a command or an inference for the preservation of life.
Right. One of the illustration that Watson uses, which is obviously excellent as well, is the taking the Lord's name in vain. Not only are we not to take the Lord's name in vain, but we're commanded to reverence the Lord's name. And so you've kind of got those, the prohibitive command, and then you have a kind of commission of don't take the Lord's name in vain, rather reverence his name. And I think at least in my mind right now, I think all of the commands carry that aspect, the negative and the positive, the restrictive and the forceful.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think so too. I think so. I'm just kind of pulling that off.
I'm trying to think about stealing.
Well, because instead of stealing, you were called to generosity.
Oh, did you? Yeah, right? There you go.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. It's the okay. That's right.
Instead of theft. Yeah,
it'd be generosity. Yeah, that's a great point. So but anyway, rule number 2, a very helpful rule. And again, I think as we get into the individual commandments later in the season, we'll be drawing out different aspects of what this means, commandment by commandment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Rule number 3, where any sin is forbidden in the commandment, there the occasion of it is forbidden also. Now, this is one of those ones, to me, it feels like a little bit like the deep end of the pool. Okay, this is getting into some real like brass tacks, kind of living. So one of the things that Watson says is where murder is forbidden, envy and rash anger are forbidden. Of course, because envy and rash anger give the opportunity for the seeds of murder to take root and to blossom into that fruit of an outward sin. So he says, where murder is forbidden, envy and rash anger are forbidden, which may occasion it. Where adultery is forbidden in the commandment, there is forbidden all that may lead to it. For example, a wanton glance of the eye, he says, or coming into the company of a harlot, which we're reminded in Proverbs 5:8, come not nigh the door of her house. You don't want to get tangled up with a harlot? Don't go near her house, right? Don't give the occasion for the sin to take place. Watson goes on to say, he who would be free from the plague must not come near the infected house.
It's a great illustration.
Under the law of the Nazarite, you'll remember that the Nazarite was forbidden to drink wine. Not only was he forbidden to drink wine, but he could not eat of the grapes, which grew on the vine by which the wine was made. As Jack mentioned, as we dig into the commandments, as we begin picking those one by one, these will be kind of the filters that we'll be running these commandments through. And again, exceedingly helpful. Yeah. Rule number 4.
That's a tough. Well, I was just like rule number 3. That's one when I was talking about in the beginning. Like I didn't think about the commandments this way, and it was eye-opening for me when I was confronted with this, because we don't think, I think a lot of people would look at these as maybe would put them in the temptation box, like use the harlot example. Well, I was tempted, but I didn't do it. Right. But if you're putting yourself in the occasion of something that is to be forbidden, as Watson argues, and I think the Proverbs example is great. The example that he says, come, if you want to avoid the plague, stay away from the house. And then that Nazarite example of you're not supposed to drink the wine. You can't even eat the grapes.
Yeah.
It's a very strong biblical principle that I think many of us don't consider when we read the 10 Commandments.
I wonder where the line is though, like where intentionality comes in this specific one, in this specific one, because is it that there is a recognition that I am putting myself into a situation where I know I'm going to be tempted and I go into that anyway? Or is it that I'm in a situation and then a surprise temptation comes about?
I think it's the former. I think if you're going to willfully disobey God's law or one of the 10 Commandments, then it is therefore an intention. Like I'm going to put myself in a bad spot, knowing it's going to be a bad spot.
It's. I think at least that's what he's getting at, is what you said, not putting myself in a spot where I'm going to have to now be grappling with whether or not I'm going to act on this temptation or not. Again, purposely putting yourself in the harlot's doorway, purposely, whatever the instance may be, is putting you in a spot that you shouldn't be in. You shouldn't have to be fighting against this temptation because you shouldn't be there in the first place.
Right.
So those are things to keep in mind.
And I think it goes back to rule 1, right? Because if you're putting yourself at the harlot's door,
right,
the wickedness in your heart is lusty or whatever, it's drawing you there, right?
Yeah.
If you know it's wrong and you're doing it, your heart is somehow sinning in that sense,
right,
because you're willfully doing something you know to be bad.
And the illustration probably breaks down, but I think experientially, this might resonate with the listener. Any of you who've tried to lose weight, okay, and so you've got your strict diet plan, laid out, your exercise regimen, all these different things, and someone invites you over or invites you to go out to dinner, go out to get ice cream, whatever, and so you think, well, I really don't want to. I probably shouldn't, but I'll behave. And then you go. And then wherever you go, the sights and the sounds and the wafting of the cooking food and all these things then takes you to I'm going to be really, really strict to well, I'll go
just one potato boat.
Yeah. just one bloomin' onion. Yeah, exactly. And then you find you're 5 bloomin' onions deep, right? In despair and fried food, No, you know what I mean, though. But it's just these little, steps that then you find yourself in a situation, these concessions that say, man, why did I? And then you take the bait, if you will. Yeah. So again, those are things to consider as we consider rule number 3, where any sin is forbidden in the commandment, there the occasion of it is forbidden also.
Yep. Rule number 4, I'm just going to read it. There's a Latin phrase that he gives. I'll just read it. I'm not good at Latin, whatever. In relatio sub intelligitur correlatum. Which means where one relation is, I know it's terrible. I'm so uneducated. Where one relation is named in the commandment, there is another relation that is included. And this one, when I was reading this, I'm sure Watson had very good reasons because he didn't do anything unintentional. Mm-hmm. He's so intentional about what he's doing. But I've always wondered if this could be 7 rules and this one could be rolled up in a different one. But he gave it its own rules, so we'll leave it in here. But where one relation is named in the commandment, the other relation is included. And his point is when the child is named, honor thy mother and thy father, there the father is included. And where there is the duty of the children to the parents mentioned, there is also included the duty of the parents to the child. So where the child is commanded to honor, it is implied then that the parent is also commanded to fulfill what we would consider their godly instruction of what we see other places in Scripture to instruct, to love, and to provide for the child.
Yeah. I think the nuance that he has in this one is that relational aspect, like the responsive aspect to a command. So if someone sins against you, if your brother sins against you and comes in repentance and asks you to forgive them, upon that, your Christian responsibility is to forgive them. Okay. Right. And so the commanded action of them to repent and to seek forgiveness is met by your requirement to forgive as Christ has forgiven. Right? Isn't that kind of like
no, that makes sense.
And I think that's what he's getting at with the illustration too of the children and the parents. Is children are called to honor their parents, but at the same time, parents are called to love and provide and instruct their children. And the failings of one side of that partnership does not get the other side off the hook.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And so your duty to God and to man is not hingent upon others' reactions to you. And that's big in that forgiveness issue too. if you sinned against someone and you go and you ask and you're repentant and you ask them for forgiveness and they say, no, I'm not going to forgive you. Well, you've done what you can do in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. Great point. It's that's a challenging one too. Like as a parent, if my child is not honoring me correctly, it doesn't negate my responsibility as the commandment states to instruct, love, and continue to provide for the child.
Yeah.
Right.
You don't get to just go unhinged because your kids. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll add, Blake, I almost asked, so my kids are taking Latin because they go like a classical school.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in public school. I had like 19 semesters of Spanish and I can barely order a burrito at Taco Bell. Like I got nothing. So my kid, like they'll come home with Latin homework and like, can you help me? I'm like, buddy, I want to instruct, to love, and provide for you.
Right.
But I'm lacking here. So
that's
anyway.
I'm not quite there, but it reminds me. I'm trying to remember. There's a comedian that had an old bit of his teenage daughter asking him to help with her homework. And he looks at it and goes, when they start putting letters with it, with their math homework.
My dad's a pretty funny guy. Whenever I would bring home homework, he would always, like math homework, for example, he would say, what? If X is so important, why is it always hiding?
Yeah, right.
That was but it was like a dad joke, but he said it like every time I had homework. So,
anyway.
Right.
And then you just laugh and walk out of the room. Like,
Dad.
Yeah. I put in a full day work. I'm not going to do your work also. Yeah. Rule number 5. Where greater sins are forbidden, lesser sins are also forbidden. Now, this is one of the great dangers, I think, in Western Christian church culture, is that of course, the effects of sin, there are, I guess you could say categorically, major sins in that they have a greater effect. They have a greater damage that is done, and things like that. But oftentimes we kind of try to pacify our own burning consciences by categorizing our sins as lesser sins or smaller sins,
Yeah, I did this thing, but it wasn't as bad as...
Yeah, it wasn't as bad as what Jack did, or whatever, I mean, at least I'm not like Jack Lee, no, I mean, you may not even put it in those terms. You may not put it in those terms, but that's the way, if we're not careful, we will tend to treat our sin with a very much more lax kind of approach because we see it as a small thing or maybe not a big deal. Where the greater sins, though, are forbidden, lesser sins are also forbidden. Watson says, though no sin in its own nature is little, yet comparatively one may be less than another. Where idolatry is forbidden, there is forbidden superstition, or bringing any innovation into God's worship, which he hath not appointed. Regulative principle. As the sons of Aaron were forbidden to worship an idol, so to sacrifice to God with strange fire. Leviticus 10:1. Mixture in sacred things is like a dash in the wine, which though it gives a color, yet doth but debase and adulterate it, is what Watson says. It is highly provoking to God to bring any superstitious ceremony into his worship, which he hath not prescribed. It is to tax God's wisdom, as if he were not wise enough to appoint the manner of how he will be served. Man, that's such a good line. Such a good line.
It is.
Such a good line. This rule, one of the things, what were you saying about this rule, Jack?
Yeah, I put a note in here.
Yeah,
it made me think of partial obedience. And you kind of mentioned at the beginning, this tendency we have to excuse sins for the greater good. And I think we do this a lot. And the example that came to my mind, because I've seen people bring this up on our Facebook page. It's been a few years, but I've seen this happen where the issue of pornography comes up and we're talking about the evils of pornography, and someone will defend pornography because it prevents them from cheating on their spouse.
Right.
Like, no.
Right.
I've seen that happen. No.
Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
they're both wicked and evil. But I think that would be a modern example, and I would not be surprised if somebody listening to that has that mindset. Well, I'd rather look at pornography.
Isn't it better?
than cheat
Isn't
on
it
my
better
spouse.
that I'm watching porn than cheating on my spouse? Well, no, you are cheating on your spouse by watching pornography. Or if you're not married, I mean, again, people will use their addictions for all kinds of things. If you're not married, oh well, isn't it better that I do this than I be depressed and lonely and yada 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 yada? No, where the greater sin is forbidden, the lesser sin is also forbidden. To say that, like Jack's example that he used, that's like saying instead of taking just one big lethal dose of poison, I'm just going to drink lots of little body destroying and mind destroying doses of poison. Not that it will quite kill me, but it will just wreck me and mess me up. I mean, that's exactly what pursuing a quote unquote lesser sin does. Yeah. It's still soul destroying. It's still an offense to God. It's still an affront to man. It's still bad for you, not only in mind, but in body and in spirit. So when we're called to make no provision for the flesh, that means both lesser and greater sins, if you want to categorize them that way.
Yeah, very good. Rule number 6, the law of God is, would you pronounce this copulative or copulative? I think it's copulative, right?
Sure.
Yeah. His point here, that he gives a Latin phrase. I'm not going to embarrass myself.
Lex est copulativa.
There you go. Thank you, Blake.
Yeah.
And his point here of this,
speed and confidence.
Oof.
That's
how you pronounce things.
Yeah,
like
right. Like biblical names. Like if you come across a biblical name, if you say it confident enough and fast enough, people will be like, "Oh, okay, I've been saying it wrong."
Everyone in the room will be like, "Oh, well, I guess that's how you say it."
Right.
But if you're like Joe Joseph, you start doing that, everyone's gonna be like, "This guy doesn't."
Right.
He's never read his Bible.
You just got to lean into it. Right. So there's your Bible reading tip of the day there, folks.
Yes, you're welcome. Rule number 6, the law of God is copulative or copulative. And what he means by this is the first and the second tables are knit together. Piety to God and equity to our neighbor being the first. I think 4 commandments are vertical minded, and the subsequent 6 are kind of horizontal as they relate to dealing with people around yourself and people around you. And his point is these 2 tables, God is joined together. They must not be put asunder, meaning you can't overemphasize one and not the other. He gives the example here of the Pharisees. He says, he who is strict on the second table but neglects the first, or he who is zealous in the first table but neglects the second, his heart is not right with God. The Pharisees were the highest pretenders for the first table, zeal and holiness, but Christ detects their hypocrisy. Matthew 22:23. He says, you have omitted judgment, mercy, and faith, speaking to the Pharisees. They were bad in the second table. They omitted judgment. That was being just in their dealing, mercy, and poor, and relieving the poor and faith. That is faithfulness in their promises and contracts with men. And God wrote, his point kind of ends, this is what he says, is God wrote both tables, and our obedience must be set a seal to both.
Right.
And it's, I think, it really is. And I think we all have tendencies to, well, maybe not all, but a lot of people have tendencies to drift towards one or the other. And I think in the Reform camp, not speaking broadly, I think there is a frozen chosen stereotype that the Reform camp, great at theology, frozen chosen, we're fantastic at theology, we love theology, but we're not really good at helping neighbors, right? Like that, I think that's a caricature of Reform. Every Reformed church I've ever been a part of has been extraordinarily evangelical.
Right.
They've been very neighbor-minded.
Right.
But I think it's
and you think about some of the greatest like missionaries throughout time and mission organizations and all that. Right. Almost exactly. So I don't know how much of that is deserved. But I do see what you're saying.
It's a common picture that's painted. That's the point.
Right. Right. That's at least the stereotype, whether it's true
accurate,
or not. Yeah.
The other stereotype, which I would say is true, progressive Christians.
It's not true of us, but it's
not true of us.
Right. Yeah. Right. What they say about us is nonsense, but what they say about them is very, very true. Yeah.
I realize how bad that sounds. No, but progressive Christians will openly, like very progressive Christians, will openly ignore the first half for the second. And they'll tell you that, like, they negate the justice of God, the holiness of God. They're not worried about those things because social justice, the love of, like, these are the things that take precedent. And I'm saying that I think that criticism stands. Like they err on the first half and press into the second half,
right?
And in doing so, they miss the point.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And anyone can be prone to one side or the other, and I think that's Watson's point. The two are knit together. Love God, love neighbor.
So I mean, it's why it's so important when you think of like the first and second greatest commandment, to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. Okay. One of the things that we see like in the epistles of John is this reoccurring theme of, to love people rightly, you must love God. And to love God expresses itself in loving people, right?
Yes.
So the two things are totally inseparable. And then along with that, you have, as I've been preaching through Romans, one of the things that really stands out to me is, the first, 11 chapters of Romans being so much doctrine. What do Christians believe? And then from Romans 12 to the end of the book, it's, well, now this is what we believe. Now this is how we apply what we believe. And the importance, again, of holding those things together. Because you can know, I mean, again, you can have the first tablet of the law. I mean, you can be able to argue little subpoints of what is that? Oh man, I should know this. I'm going to get roasted. What is the big long, wow, this is terrible. The big long words pertaining to Christ that are always like that like Reformed people love to talk about. What is that?
I don't know what you're talking. I want to help, but
what it is, but I'm not giving you enough breadcrumbs to be able to follow the trail. Anyway, you can argue the subpoints of subpoints of subpoints of subpoints, but if it doesn't have any practical outworking in your life, like if you can talk about the deepest theologies, but you're addicted to porn, it's like, well, what, right. what's the outworking here? Furthermore, if you're going to love others rightly, you have to have right doctrine.
Yeah.
Right. Like you have to know what God has actually said is good, what God has actually said is true, what God has actually said is pleasing to him, and then operate from that basis as we seek to love others, as we seek to obey the commandments and things like that. Yeah. Those things love for God and love for man must be held together. Doctrine and practice must be held together.
Yeah. We've been going through the book of Galatians, and it's another great example. I mean, Galatians, the whole purpose of the letter, the original why Paul wrote this letter to the church of Galatia was these Judaizers that come in and were undermining the gospel, right? Mm-hmm. They were basically saying you need Christ plus works. And Paul comes in like a fireball. Yeah. You foolish Galatians, who's bewitched you? Yeah. And he labors on justification by faith alone. I mean, just pounds it. Right.
Comes in like an entire roll of Black Cat firecrackers.
Yes, he does. Yeah. With a mushroom season cloud coming.
Yeah. Season 1 reference.
But then he gets to 5. Like in this whole thing, right? He's talking about it's all doctrine. He defends his apostleship and valid, like doctrine. But it's the same book where you get the fruits of the Spirit.
Right, yeah.
Because then he turns sideways. He says, stop biting and devouring one another. The fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, so on and so forth. This chapter 6, he goes, bear one another's burdens. I mean, it's all, it's vertical in doctrine, and then it's the outworking of it. Once you have justification by faith, fruit of the Spirit go out. It's the same thing. Yeah.
So in a way, we could say that the commandments, they must be taken together. They must be taken together. Like though they have they must be seen as a whole, I guess.
Yes.
You could say. Yeah, and you don't get to just pick and choose. You don't get to Jefferson Bible it and say, well, I'm good at this one, I like this one, but this one I'll, leave off to the side.
Exactly.
Rule number 7. God's law forbids not only the acting of sin in our own persons. I wrote an article on this, actually prodded from Rule 7. But being an accessory to or having any hand in the sins of others. Okay.
Oof. This is a tough one, Blake.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is, one of the, when I was reading this and studying in this book, and what prompted that article I wrote, accessories to sin, was this section. And it is heavy hitting. For example, Watson says, by decreeing unrighteous decrees and imposing on others that which is unlawful. Jeroboam, for example, made the people of Israel to sin because he was an accessory to their idolatry by setting up golden calves. So David, though he did not in his own person kill Uriah, yet because he wrote a letter to Joab to set Uriah in the forefront of the battle, it was done by his command. Therefore, he was an accessory to Uriah's death. In fact, when the prophet confronts David, what does he say? He actually says that Uriah is killed by your hand.
Yeah.
That David didn't actually kill Uriah, but he put forth the decree that would get Uriah killed on purpose. Okay, this isn't simply a casualty of war. This is a put him up front, draw back so that he's killed.
Yeah.
And so therefore David's hands are as bloody as the enemy who killed Uriah. Again, thou hast killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword, 2 Samuel 12:9. He also says we become accessories to the sins of others by not hindering them when it is in our power. If a master of a family sees his servant break the Sabbath or hears him swear and let him alone, doth not use the power he hath to suppress him, he becomes an accessory to his sin. Eli is a perfect example of this.
Yeah.
Eli does not punish his sons when they made the offering to the Lord abhorrent, and he made himself guilty. Eli is an example of a lot of things. But when you look at Eli and his sons, their rebellion starts very early.
Yeah.
And he doesn't address it, and it grows. And it actually gets worse and worse. I mean, and pretty soon they're robbing the sacrifices of God, and then robbing the sacrifices of God turns into sleeping with women in the temple and robbing the sacrifices of God. And by the time he gets around to confronting them, they just blow him off.
Yeah.
I mean, because they are so set in their sin after just years of not being confronted. Eli at the very beginning should have done everything that he could to stop what was taking place, and he simply chose not to. So he becomes an accessory to sin. And that's exactly as God talks to Samuel, and what Samuel then relays to Eli is that the blessing being removed from Eli's family is not on his sons, though they will be punished. It's on Eli.
Yeah.
And it's on Eli for not stopping what he could have stopped, and apparently just simply chose not to. Watson says, he that suffers an offender to pass unpunished makes himself an offender. Watson goes on in this thought. He says, by counseling, abetting, or provoking others to sin, we become accessories to sin. By consenting to another's sin. So you think of Saul, and the death of Stephen. Saul's going around, he's hunting Christians, persecuting the church. As Stephen is dragged outside of the city to be stoned, his clothes are laid at the feet of Saul. And though we don't really have an indication that Saul is part of the stoning or anything else, it's the consenting to what is taking place brings guilt on him as well. Saul did not cast one stone at Stephen, yet the scripture says Saul was consenting to his death, Acts 8:1. Thus he had a hand in it. If several did combine to murder a man, and they should tell another of their intent, and he should give his consent to it, he would be guilty. Though his hand was not the hand that held the murder weapon.
Yeah.
Question for discussion. And I think you posted this on the page, I think.
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
And I didn't get a chance to see what the comments were, so you'll have to fill me in on some of that. But the question that we posed was this on this point. What about voting? So is your vote a consent to the sin that might be committed by the individual that you voted for? So, for example, are you an accessory to sin when you vote for someone who is pro-abortion? This used to be categorically a Democrat issue, but this year has reared its ugly head as now both a Democrat and a Republican issue as well. Without getting too political, I think this is a monumental move. I think from here on, abortion will be off the table as a political voting issue. If both parties are saying, well, we're cool with it, or we're cool with it in certain cases,
right,
or whatever. If there's if there's a promotion or an ambivalence toward it, I'm not sure where we go from here politically. But the question remains: what about voting? Are we an accessory to sin if we vote for someone who's going to promote sinful policies? What do you think, Jack?
Yeah.
And what are the comments? I'm interested.
There weren't as many as I expected there to be. I think because I put the word abortion in the
right. So the 12 people that saw it, yeah, right,
yeah, because it got suppressed.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, let me also say, I don't know when you're listening to this. We're recording this, I think, exactly 3 weeks from the 2024 presidential election. So we're 3 weeks out from that election. So depending on when you're ever listening to this, that's just
we should repost the question, but instead of saying abortion, say women's reproductive rights. And
there you go.
Then they'll promote the post. Thousands and thousands of
trick the algorithm.
Yeah, right. Sorry, algorithm.
Most people said yes. A lot of people said yes. There were some people who were saying, there's a hard issue involvement. Like if you're voting for the person for that reason, then there's some guilt by association. I have mixed feelings. I would say I lean towards yes. I think, especially, it's hard here because both parties are saying it's okay to some level in this current election, which is devastating.
Right.
On the Democrat side, and I'm not saying anything anyone doesn't know. I mean, they've half the platform this year seems to be based on that issue.
Oh yeah.
Right. So there's it's like ratcheted up yet another level. So
right.
I tend to think yes. I think there is some level of culpability, but man,
so this is where it's hard.
It's a tough one. It's a really tough.
Yeah. So then let's take it out of I think we would all agree. That you don't like, so Republican or Democrat, you don't like 100% of the things that they do all the time. Like you're never 100% behind your party. Probably not anyway. And some of those things are not just policy issues, but they're, sin issues as well, beyond abortion. So, sexual depravity and different things that come up that are quote legalized and whatever drug things. And I mean, like things that we as Christians would say, well, no, hold on. God has spoken clearly about this. Both parties offend those points. And it's not just on abortion. It's on these other things.
There's a myriad of things. Yeah.
Right. It's on these other things as well. And then take it back out of like an election kind of thing. And you think about, corporations and things like that will take, your money and they will use it for wickedness. What about your taxes? You're paying taxes, and yet the government will use that tax money to, for example, fund abortions or fund, other things that you would disagree with.
But I think, Blake, I think there's a point though with some of this where, like in our current election, the platform is built on it, and to me that's so much different than like I pay taxes and it gets voted 15 different ways and ends up,
right.
And I don't know. It's a really complex issue.
Right. So I definitely see what you're saying. So maybe taking the tax element out of it, like, so take this one, for example.
Okay.
So where was that? What state was like banned, was Georgia? Did Georgia ban abortion a while ago?
Yeah, Georgia was one.
Or Georgia was one of them, I think. And I remember like one of the big things, of course, the backlash against, the banning abortion thing was these corporations coming in saying, we have the back of our employee and all that. And one of them was Starbucks, right? And Starbucks was saying that if one of their employees gets pregnant and they live in a state where there is no abortion, that they will pay to fly that woman to a state where she can have the abortion, and then immediately return to work, and keep, which obviously is the reason we can't have mothers at home when there's coffees to be made, and
Absolutely.
so the price of a baby's life is worth keeping the positive,
worth that latte,
the positive cash flow at Starbucks. Anyway. So in my mind, then the Christian has a decision to make there. If you have a company saying like, we will fly our employees, like we will foot the bill to go and to help you murder your child, then where is the responsibility of the Christian when it comes to Starbucks,
Yeah.
Or is it simply a secondary thing that like evil people will do evil with the money that they have and with the power that they have? And so are you, as a Christian, responsible for what they are doing? And this is the big question. And I don't really have an answer for it. I think maybe, conscience probably plays a role, but there has to be a line somewhere of right and wrong approach on this.
I'd agree. I think conscience takes preeminence, but to Watson's point, if you're doing this if I'm voting for this person so I can get this outcome, like if I'm voting for Harris so that abortion rights can be, unrestricted or whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
You're culpable like that. You are like, that is intentionality.
Yeah.
And I don't know though. I have a hard time with this election because, half the platform for the Democrats are built on that this time.
Yeah.
And,
right.
And
right.
I don't know how I struggle to understand how a Christian could vote Democrat in this election, knowing that, and really the past couple elections, but it's just ratcheted up.
Sure.
I'll share this. A few weeks ago, a month or two ago, I had a buddy over who's a theonomist, and we were talking about the election. This was before Trump really got soft on abortion, but he was telling me he wasn't going to vote at all because he couldn't do it. Like none of these candidates align with God's biblical law and such. And I would say, well, I plan to vote. And he's like, well, how can you do that? And I said, and my reasoning, and I'm questioning some of this, right? Because a little bit's changed, but my reasoning at the time was for Trump's position on the issue of abortion, regardless of where he stood directly, there was an emphasis on putting the power back in the states. And that would give control to the people in the states. And there's more opportunity for abolition at that point.
Right.
Like I live in Oklahoma and there are a lot of people in office. I think our governor, in fact, who would who would approve
Mm-hmm.
a bill written to abolish
Yeah.
abortion completely, right? So
Yeah.
that was a reasoning I had, right? But now I have
Mm-hmm.
questions about Trump's care. Anyway, not that I've had, not to get too political here. That's not why
Yeah.
we're here.
Yeah.
But
No.
it's an interesting discussion.
Yeah. We're not to get too political, and then we get intensely political.
2.5 hours
Yeah.
later.
Yeah. No. And again, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, Christians should be involved as much as they're
Absolutely
have the ability to be in those things.
Yeah. I'd encourage you, if you've got thoughts here, genuinely post them in the comments. These are things I'm trying to actively work through. Like I don't have good answers. And I've heard well-reasoned people on both sides, but
Right.
Blake, I think you're right. I think there is absolutely a line that people cross. And for me, related to, like, if I look at the Eli example, it's either gross neglect, right? I think there's some culpability in gross neglect for understanding the issue, or Saul, right? If we're looking at the other Saul example, extreme intentionality of being involved and being a part of it.
So maybe you just hit it right on the head. Maybe you hit it right on the head in saying that, because I think as we're looking at Watson's rule here, that seems to be what he's getting at with his two examples, that there's either an intent or there's an extreme neglect. In Eli's example, he was just derelict. He was derelict priest, derelict father, everything. Whereas again, Saul, he consents to was taking that. And I like what you said too, Jack, about the intentionality of it. I guess if I'm saying, well, I'm voting for this person because they're going to do everything they can to maintain my ability to express my sexual perversities, or to murder my children, or to have my mind legally just baked out with drugs and things like that, then there is an intentionality there that is obviously sinful.
Yeah.
I think.
I'd agree with that.
At the time of this recording, I agree with that position. Yeah, right.
Well, genuinely welcome your comments. If you're still we're almost an hour in. If you've got thoughts here, I welcome them. Genuinely share. One other example that under this rule number 7 about God's law forbids not only acting with sin as his own person, but being an accessory to. One other example he gives here,
this one's
by
powerful.
example. This one is example. This could be a whole episode at some point, but his examples are powerful, and setting a bad example of occasions to sin so that you become an accessory. So if his example is a father swears and the child by his example learns to swear, the father is an accessory to the child's sin because he taught him by example. Man.
Yeah. He goes on to say, as there are diseases that are hereditary, so there are sins. We could get into that whole, that could be a whole episode by itself. The concept of like generational sin, and
I bet we'll get into that because there's some of that in the Ten Commandments, right? So
right, and so you get into some of that stuff. I mean, but at bare minimum, you see patterns of sin running in families. Bare minimum, just because of the example of it. That abusive alcoholic fathers statistically produce abusive alcoholic fathers who produce abusive alcoholic fathers until somebody breaks, by God's grace, breaks the trend of the thing. But again, you, particularly in your responsibility toward your children, you set an example. And whether you like it or not, your kids look at you and say, Dad is my primary example of godliness. Mom is my primary example of godliness. And if you are not taking that role seriously, and you are living hypocritically, and you are, one thing in public and another thing behind closed doors, friends, there are major issues there, and you're causing greater damage than you may even think. Yeah. You can't excuse it by saying things like, well, kids are resilient, kids get through these kinds of things. I mean, that's not God's view on it. God's view is that you're responsible for your children and that you will give an account for your children. And so keep that in mind. That's a little side light to kind of Watson's
That's great.
example here. Yeah.
It's heavy.
Number 8.
Yep. Rule number 8. This is what I love about the Puritans, because Watson, we've been in the ring with Watson and he's been beating us up.
Yeah.
I mean, he's been left hook, right hook, uppercut. But rule number 8, he inserts Christ. Listen to what he says. Rule number 8, the last rule about the commandment is this, that though we cannot by our own strength fulfill all these commandments, the Lord hath provided this encouragement for us, for what we're able to do, Christ has done for us. And I paraphrase that a little bit because there was some more Latin in there.
Right.
But the threefold encouragement for the Christian man, there's a lot here. I'm just going to read kind of the 3 points. It was a long paragraph.
Now, this is nice because, again, like you said, Watson has given us a black eye. Now he hands us the raw steak to put on it. You know?
He does. But his point is the work of Christ, right? Though we don't have the ability to obey any command, God has given us Ezekiel 36:27. I will cause you to walk in my statutes, right? And therefore, the Christian, don't be discouraged. What he says, that though thou hast no strength on thy own, God will give thee this strength. In Christ, we have the strength and the ability. Our hearts are changed from stone to flesh. God awakens and puts his spirit within us. And he works in us, right, to do this. The fruit of the Spirit, we spoke with this earlier. It's a process of sanctification. So we are not able, but don't be discouraged, because God will and can work through you. He also says, if there be truth in the inward parts, God sees the faith. This is he says, God will see the faith and pass by the failing. The gospel remits something of the severity of the moral law. So recognizing honestly, it's like a participation trophy, which sounds bad because Jesus did it all, right? I don't mean it that way. But if there's effort, like we're genuinely trying, God recognizes the faith of the obedience, that though we fail,
the sincerity of the faith, obedience, which of course flows from, and just for clarity, we're not talking about earning your salvation,
not
or earning standing with God or anything like that. But this is that reaction because you are a Christian. Your genuine attempts and struggles toward obedience are something that in Christ are beautiful to the Father. It's I think maybe the illustration breaks down. Don't think about it too deeply. It's kind of like when your little child colors you a picture, and it is not great. Everything's out of proportion. My children always draw me with hair. I think they're mocking me. I don't know, but it's, it's out, things are out of proportion, out of color. I mean, you would look at it in all the strict technical lens of what makes good art and all of these different things. And you could look at it and you give it to an art critic and they could criticize it and say, this is terrible and all this stuff. But what makes the heart of a parent beat is not the quality of the art, but the sincerity of the love of the child who has colored you this picture and has presented it to you. And that's what makes you pin it up on the refrigerator, right?
Yeah.
Not because it's technically beautiful and not because it's perfect, but it's because of the love that this little weak one has for you. Yeah.
That drawing is pregnant with love. It's overflowing with love and joy in what it is. Right. And I think that's the point. And, again, I'll read what he says, is God will see the faith and pass by the failing. And I think in the faith, when we fail, there's genuine repentance, there's turning, right? And you see the fruit of the Spirit overflow. Watson also says, wherein our personal obedience comes short, God will be pleased to accept us in our surety. Ephesians 1:6, he hath made us accepted in the beloved.
Right.
So though our obedience be imperfect, through Christ our surety, God looks upon it as perfect. And God's mercy is pleased to crown by virtue of the blood of our mediator. So again, Watson beats us up, but reminds us, gives us a big hug at the end.
Right.
Seek Christ, seek his face, love him, pursue him. Yes. And your failings are covered by the blood of Jesus.
Yep.
And that's a wonderful rule, an important rule to remember when studying the 10 Commandments. So
yeah, if you leave off that last one, what despair, you know?
Totally.
I mean, if you forget, if it's because you get this, particularly when you read the Puritans, if you're not careful, you can get this morbid introspection. Like, I really am just the worst creature on earth. I never even considered these different aspects of these different things. And if you're not constantly glancing at Christ in all of this, then yeah, it would just be despairing.
It's depressing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Well, there you have it. Watson's 8 rules for reading the 10 Commandments. Anything in closing, Blake? Anything you want to add? Any rule number 9?
Well, so again, if you enjoyed this podcast in particular, this episode, really would encourage you to pick this book up, because everything we just covered in an hour, that's like 3 pages of this book.
Really is like,
it
may not even be 3 pages.
Yeah, right. And there's so many other just really rich aspects in here. We've been saying this all along. I think I've even mentioned it whenever we talk about the 10 Commandments in past episodes. In my mind, Watson's The 10 Commandments is one of the best and one of the most approachable works, particularly in the category of Puritan writings. Yeah. I love Watson. All of his stuff is just really, really excellent. Yeah.
He's one of my favorite Puritans.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So anyway, that's all that I've got. This has been the Chorus in the Chaos. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.